amazing thing about blockchain is it operates as a distributed computer, meaning it can do all the things that a traditional computer can do. So, as I said in my opening statement, right now there are about 5 companies that really control the internet as we think of it, and they have their own servers, and our information is in those servers. Well, the great thing about blockchain is it distributes that power across the network. So you can think of the entire network as the computer that is doing the transactions. And in that circumstance, individuals own their own data. They control their own data, and they choose if they want to sell it to someone, if they want to pass it on to someone. All of that is under the control of the consumer, and no one else can monetize their data. So in many ways, that innovation, turning distributed computers into a giant server, is one of the most radical and potentially transformative innovations in our lifetime.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to CraterCrypto. The comments you just heard were from an attorney up on Capitol Hill who was a witness in last week's House hearing on energy use in cryptocurrency and blockchains. And I just thought he did a really good job of succinctly and in layman's terms laying out the foundational shift that blockchain technology could represent, and a lot of people hope it represents. So like I said, the House Committee on Energy and Commerce held their hearing last week, and it was entitled, here I got to read this because it's so long, Cleaning Up Cryptocurrency, the Energy Impacts of Blockchain. I don't think they're going to be cleaning up much of anything. I think more like minimizing the mess. But nonetheless, they held this hearing, and I just wanted to go through some high-level thoughts that I had on how it went and what I think it represents in the bigger picture. And then some specific testimony of some of the witnesses that I thought was really interesting, and just wanted to talk a little bit about it because I thought it was really insightful. These are experts in their fields, and they had some interesting things to say. So let's get into it. First off, I thought the meeting stayed mostly on point. There wasn't any partisan sniping. I mean, there was some, you're going to get some of that, but no grandstanding or anything like that, which I find super annoying. I think that's mostly because this is a focused committee setting, and there weren't any of the party leaders that like to get up there and get on their soapbox and lecture the rest of us. So there wasn't much of that. It was able to stay on topic and was a productive conversation in that regard. I think they talked about most of the things that you would think. So primarily just the raw energy usage, its impact on the grid, its impact on the climate. How do we transition to renewables in a smart way? Maybe the potential of Bitcoin miners to participate in creating a more reliable energy grid, a more robust energy grid. And then, obviously these people are representatives. They have constituents, and they're interested in the job creating potential of cryptocurrency and Bitcoin mining in particular. So, common sense fields, areas that representatives would want to discuss, that's what they talked about. I think it was a step forward. It was a conversational tone, but I found that this meeting, in comparison to past meetings, the tone was more serious. And you can tell that these people have put some more thought into what it is they're talking about. Cryptocurrencies, mining, what do these terms mean, right? There's a level of seriousness that was absent before. And finally, they're not all the way there. And I don't blame them for not fully wrapping their heads around blockchain and cryptocurrencies. I don't blame them for that at all. These are busy people. They got a lot of issues they need to be up to speed on. I do blame them for taking so much time to start taking the time to understanding these things. But they are finally doing it, and I hope that there are more productive conversations, and that I've said before, I hope this results in a light touch framework. I hope these people understand the potential of the technology, the innovation that could take place here, and that any rules they create need to ensure that isn't stifled, right? They need to let entrepreneurs and innovators innovate, because they'll create amazing experiences and opportunities for others. So those are my high-level takeaways. Nothing groundbreaking happened here. There's not going to be any specific policies that directly stem from this, but you got some insight into what these lawmakers are thinking about, what the issues that are at the front of their minds, how they could differ by geographic location and by party lines, obviously. So it was a step forward, and that's good. But I wanted to talk about some of the specific testimony because I thought actually that's more interesting because these people are experts. They are participating in the industry every day, and they each have a unique perspective. So I wanted to highlight some of the things that were said in the hearing last week. First off, one of the charges that's often levied against Bitcoin and proof of work mining is that it's wasteful. It wastes energy that we don't need to use because we have a perfectly viable alternative in proof of stake. Now, Brian Brooks kind of answers both of these questions. Firstly, by addressing the value judgment you're making when you describe it as wasteful, and then pivoting to a description of why, or his take on why, you can't just pivot from proof of work to proof of stake, that they're not exactly the same thing, and you're making trade-offs by deciding to do that.
The measure of waste in an economic activity is whether the activity is producing value that other people are willing to pay for. And so Bitcoin is vastly the largest cryptocurrency by market capitalization by a huge amount. And, over the last 6 months has varied between $800 billion and $1.2 trillion. So I begin by saying it's clearly not wasted. It's an asset that large numbers of people are willing to pay for a variety of reasons we could talk about. In terms of whether there's an alternative, whether we could just shift to proof of stake or do this a different way, the problem with proof of stake versus proof of work is that proof of stake, though it is a set of very, very valuable innovations, has at its core a dependence on trust of who the stakeholders are. The original vision of Bitcoin was, this is the only trustless network, so I don't have to care who my counterparty is or who the major shareholders are. The next Bitcoin is given out based on a lottery, right? So in a proof of stake network, 51% of the ownership of that network can rewrite the ledger, can steal everybody else's money, can change the code in ways that are not favorable to the minority shareholders, just like they could in a business corporation. That's not possible in Bitcoin because of proof of work.
The second comment I wanted to highlight was from John Belizaire, who is the CEO of Soluna Computing, and they specialize in creating these high-powered data centers. And he makes reference to a vision that he's laid out, where he's essentially envisions a future where we have these really powerful data centers that are initially focused on Bitcoin mining, but the amount of computing power that these data centers are capable of could, once they reach a certain scale, be used to tackle other large-scale problems. The two examples he gives are running an algorithm that recommends movies for you to watch based on some kind of suggestion algorithm. Kind of a trivial use case, but then a more serious one of gene sequencing and developing therapies and medicines to help address illnesses. So kind of AI applications that require intense computing. These data centers, once they reach a certain maturity and scale, could be repurposed to tackle those big problems. And I thought that was really cool because I'd never thought about that before. I obviously have read about their potential to be a really important part of a sustainable grid, but hadn't thought about repurposing that computing power for something else like AI and machine learning applications. So really cool.
If the vision I've been laying out here at the hearing comes to fruition, you'll have lots of these types of flexible data centers around the grid. And as they get to a certain size, they won't only have Bitcoin mining in them, they'll have other types of pausable, batchable applications, like applications that help to decide the next movie to display to anyone on this meeting, or helping to see if a molecule is a good fit for addressing this pandemic that we're working on. Those types of back-end analysis processes can be done within these facilities once they're established and have the scale to address these types of applications. That's the hope that we have, that as you begin to make this infrastructure and computing a integrated part of the grid, it can play many, many roles, that type of computing, to solve a host of problems, not just securing the Bitcoin network.
And the last comment I wanted to highlight was, again, we go back to Brian Brooks, where he's talking about when you think about Bitcoin specifically, it's important to not just think about the market cap when you're thinking about the size of the opportunity and disruption that regulation could represent. It's not just about the market cap. It's about all the other transactions that are happening every day. And then secondly, the degree to which Bitcoin underpins the entire DeFi ecosystem. And if you take that away, you're really going to disrupt a really thriving area that shows a lot of potential, that it's not just an isolated token. There's a web of applications, there's a web of protocols that are now interconnected with Bitcoin and represent a really promising space. And so he's kind of cautioning lawmakers to not be rash, to not stand up regulations that could inhibit this growth, and to be thoughtful about what they do enact.
It would also be bad to assume that the entire value of Bitcoin, for example, is measured just by the market cap of Bitcoin. Because in fact, the transaction throughput on the Bitcoin blockchain is many, many times, many multiples of the Bitcoin market cap. And that's because the network that is Bitcoin has all kinds of transaction layers built on top of it, the Lightning Network being the most famous. That's transacting hundreds of billions of dollars of transactions every day using the Bitcoin blockchain. And so thinking that the cost benefit that this committee thinks about is limited to the market cap would be a big mistake. So that would be a problem. And finally, although a little bit more of a financial services committee than an energy and commerce committee issue, Bitcoin is the reference asset for most decentralized finance. So if you want to go and get 8% at BlockFi or 4% at Genesis or someplace else, the way that rate of return is being generated is because of Bitcoin trading going on in the background. So if Bitcoin, as the bedrock of the entire crypto ecosystem, went away, a lot of the rest of these Web3 innovations would also go away. So failing to recognize that connection would be a problem.
So that's it for today, everybody. Just some really interesting comments from the witnesses. We'll be keeping an eye out for how this unfolds this year. I do expect to see some motion and hopefully some forward momentum on light touch regulation that kind of levels the playing field for everybody and creates a space where innovation can happen and it can start benefiting everybody. Until next time, everybody, cheers.